So welcome, 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 our beloved and brilliant colleague, John. We so appreciate your remarkable leadership and solidarity. And as always at SETC, we begin all things by giving thanks and acknowledging our creator, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So, John, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and share a bit about your remarkable work, sir?
Yeah, I suppose the best way to introduce myself is to say that as a career, I've been a benefit designer. And a benefit designer is it's an art, it's a craft, it's a science, it's any and all those things. And above all else, it's a knack. So once I left university, this is back in the 1970s, I started work with the Ontario Ministry of Community and Social Services as a policy analyst in the design of sometimes what we would call social assistance or income assistance. Some people call it welfare policies for the Ontario government. And I stayed there for the better part of 30 years and then went out on my own in the immediate post-millennium period. And have my little tiny consultancy called Open Policy. And I live and work in North Scarborough, uh, lower income part of Toronto, in a I guess a community called Milliken, and I work mostly on data and benefit design issues, write op-eds in the paper, work with various different organizations. I got some things going right now with West Neighbourhood House in Parkdale, St. Michael's Hospital, the Wellesley Institute, Tamarack Institute, and at any one time, there's a bunch of organizations that I'm working with.
That's absolutely incredible. So your body of work speaks for itself, and your tenacity, your resilience, and all that you do for so many. And as you know, I grew up in Scarborough as well, so I'm
Aha!
a Scarborough boy as well. So I appreciate
Yeah.
you still repping. So my next question: what's inspiring you about your work right now? What has you curious, or what's keeping you up at nights?
The main thing that I've been working on is poverty reduction, and I was a member of Minister Jean-Yves Duclos' committee on advising him on poverty reduction and targets and poverty lines. And so back in 2018, the government uh, brought in the market basket measure as its official poverty line, and it also had two targets: one to lower poverty by 20% by 2020, and then the harder one, which is to take it down by 50% by 2030. The problem that we had, well, first of all, a good problem is that we lowered poverty by more than 50% during the pandemic because we had a whole lot of pandemic benefits that had that effect. Although not designed for people living in poverty, they mostly went to people living in poverty. Some people thought that would happen. Other people, like me, it surprised a bit. But now we're going the wrong way. And so what's keeping me up at night is the fact that we're going in the wrong direction with the removal of the pandemic benefits. We're starting poverty, climb again, child poverty, people, disability poverty, working poverty, you name it. I guess what we would call income assistance or welfare poverty has stayed somewhat about the same, but all the other ones are rising. And I guess in particular, seniors poverty. The other thing is keeping me up at night is it's the very high rents that are forcing people into eviction and homelessness for no real good reason except that the rent goes up and they can't pay it. And so our income security programs and our other programs like that regulate that would keep rent down are not doing the job. And now I think we're on the verge of seeing, unfortunately, a lot more homelessness.
Yeah, the housing crisis is like almost a poly crisis in itself. It's an
Yeah.
eviction crisis, a rent crisis, a homelessness crisis. It's yeah, it's just ridiculous. And
It's
once
even a food crisis because the one thing that we have to remember is that the cost of rent is indivisible. What does that mean? It means you must pay the rent. You can't pay 70% of the rent or 80% of the rent. You got to pay 100% of the rent, or else you can be evicted. With food, you can scrimp. You can maybe miss half a meal. You can eat less costly food. Clothing, you can have one less pair of socks, or not, or buy your clothing at a cheaper outlet. But with the rent, you must pay it, and that indivisibility is the real problem with rent as an item of need.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more, sir. Thank you so much for the context and once again your body of work and all the actionable insights that you share. So my next question, what challenges and barriers are you facing in your work? And what are some of the approaches you take to overcome these challenges and barriers?
Well, one thing that's happened that I'm going to be writing about soon is just and I doubt you will have heard this before, perhaps you will, is in the post pandemic period, is the inavailability of staff. Uh, in the pre-pandemic period, I could talk to people at the federal government level, at the provincial, at the municipal level, and talk about problems, work together, and that sort of thing. So even though I now have very good availability to politicians, councillors, MPs, MPPs, and their staff, uh, and their political staff, what we've started to see is a real lack of involvement with the community, with the paid non-political staff, the people who do the workday things. So that's very much bothering me, and this is something we're going to talk about. And that might be a new problem. The others, outside of general issues related to poverty reduction, the things I've been very worried about is the Canada Emergency Response Benefits and the Canada Recovery Benefits, and the very unfair and unscrupulous ways I think that the Canada Revenue Agency, the federal government, is going after very low income people and forcing them to repay these benefits when in good faith they believe themselves to be eligible. And the reality is that the Canada Revenue Agency is enforcing a different program than it implemented. It gave a whole set of rules for people to apply for the programs, and they did. And then the legislation says something different, and now all these people they're paying billions back, and these are the same people that we're talking about going to food banks and facing eviction are now having to pay large amounts of money back. And even though they can't, the federal government simply says, "Oh, we'll just take it out of your refundable credits in the future. It doesn't matter to us if you don't pay it back. We'll take it out of your entitlements." And this is causing extreme hardship, and it's just a real shame. So I've written extensively about that. I've blogged about it, and worked with journalists at the Globe and Mail and other places on it. And we're going to continue that fight because this is at least the main part of the pandemic, let's say, was over a year or two ago, but now this holdover. When you have, for example, you have companies like Bell that shut down part of their operations, yet they keep the $40 million that they got from the federal government. Uh, I don't see people that get the big corporations that get those grants remitting their money back quickly. But when it comes to poor people, racialized people, people in uh, various different equity-seeking groups, we see the very stiff way that they're going after people, and it really is quite unfair and quite a tragedy for Canadians.
I couldn't agree more. That is crude. And once again, that distinction between the private sector actors not having to be held to the same level of scrutiny, or that's just that pullback, I think once again speaks to the need for greater social justice warriors and folks on the front lines, speaking truth to power, writing, documenting, pushing policy. So once again, I just applaud your leadership and all that you do for.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, Victor, is you got a lot of those people who applied for those benefits in good faith who are in the cash economy, but when they're asked for proof of the various different income that they or the very hardship that they endured during the pandemic, the standards that the government has for them, I would call them forensic accounting standards, which no one in the cash economy participates in. So they're just sitting ducks and they're just told to pay all the money back. And when you talk about double standards, think about if you were a waiter back in 2019 or 2020, let's say, and you forgot an envelope worth full of tips in your drawer, and you found it and you said, "Oh my, I have to tell the Canada Revenue Agency about this immediately. I will tell them about this so that they can tax me more." The standard that they apply for that extra money, sure, just tell us what it was, no problem. No forensic standards. They're quite willing to tax you based on the flimsiest of evidence you give them. They don't say, "Are you sure you got that money as a tip?" But when it comes to benefits, a whole different standard is applied. So that's something we're working on a lot with a lot of different groups right now.
That's incredible work. It's important work. And once again, there isn't enough people, I think, fighting for folks on the margins and the periphery of the economy, or making sure that we hold folks accountable to policy that just doesn't center justice, access, inclusion, diversity, decolonization, or equity. So once again, I just applaud your leadership, sir. So my next question, do you have a set of key priorities right now in your work?
A key priorities now is to continue working on the previous census. Census, in many ways, it was an outlier. And when it comes to employment and income, yes, it's going to give us a lot of accurate information, but we should say they're false positives because unemployment was very high and incomes were very high during this one period. And so the census does look like an outlier, but when it comes to age and other demographics, it's a good census because it's accurate. And so I'm still continue to work on that, and especially in regard to seniors and poor seniors. And so that's been the main body of my work in that area is to help people who are retiring on a low income and to actually talk with and set up dialogues on issues related to the growing poverty of seniors in our midst. By the mid 90s, we were down to 2 or 3% poverty amongst seniors, and now that has quadrupled. uh, uh, Sort of hidden in plain sight. But you know, it's although it's a tragedy when you have a 25-year-old male who becomes homeless for whatever reasons, including eviction, it's quite a different thing if it's an 83-year-old woman, and that's just the sort of thing that we're seeing now, where single women, especially in private market accommodation, the protections for people like that are just so threadbare. And so I think we're going to see a new face of people who face those evictions, and they are going to be the lower income senior private market renters. The people in subsidized or the big houses, they're doing okay, but the others are not.
I couldn't agree more, and that's scary. 2% in the 90s, and it's quadrupled. And it's 2023
Yeah.
when things should be getting better.
Since the 1990s, yeah, the poverty amongst seniors. Now, it's hard to know exactly why it's happening. We know that one reason is that seniors who are immigrants or refugees usually get lower old age security because they don't have enough residency in Canada. The Harper government in 2014 disallowed sponsored immigrants from getting the guaranteed income supplement, which is the largest part of the old age security package. And it's non-taxable, but they can't get it at all if you're sponsored unless you've been here for 20 years, which it's something they put into effect in 2014. And so somebody who came in 2016, let's say, is going to have to wait till 2036. They might not be here anymore that long a time, but then they would just get a tiny bit of the old age security. And so it's really an issue that's facing immigrants that don't have social security agreements with Canada. And we're just seeing more and more poverty amongst those groups.
Yeah, well, clearly. But once again, I applaud your leadership. There's not a lot of people looking at these issues, analyzing them, and coming up with solutions, or at least pressing the feds or different anchor institutions to play
Well,
the.
Victor, if I see somebody already doing something, then I don't spend time there. I go off to places. There's lots of other places that nobody's paying attention to, and that's one of them.
Ashe, I couldn't agree more, sir. I couldn't agree more. So my second last question, what is your ultimate goal and what does success look like and feel like to you and your colleagues?
I think success is really, especially since I was on the group that came up with the poverty line and the 50% target. I think we really do have to meet that target of 50% reduction. And there's a nuance of that that's really important. The federal government could, get a few people that are right near the poverty line, over the poverty line, and maybe meet their 50% goal. But what that would mean in 2030 is that everybody who's in poverty is in deep poverty. There would be no one in shallow poverty. So we got to make sure both things are taking place, that not only are we improving the numbers, but we also have to make sure that people who are in the deepest poverty are participating in becoming non-poor in the same way that people who are just a little bit poor. And we have a child benefit now that's at the point where most children who are in poverty are in shallow poverty. They're not in deep poverty, but now we have people on programs like social assistance, Ontario Works, it's called in Ontario, and homeless people who are more than 50%, or let's say they don't even get to half the market basket measure poverty line. And so it's quite understandable when we see the amazing amounts of new people coming into food banks, because once again, you got to pay the rent. And if there's anything else you can do, then those are the things you're going to do to make sure that you can pay the rent.
That is a fact, sir. That is a fact. So, after such an incredible body of work and journey doing this important, vital, essential advocacy on the front lines of social justice issues, do you have any calls to action or closing thoughts for our listeners and our viewers?
I think my closing thoughts, when we see our politics heading more towards populism and more to the political right, and the people finding answers in more conservative approaches, is to make sure that that real conservatism, as opposed to some of the conservatism we see now, has always meant that society takes care of the people who are most vulnerable. And if I remember the ministers who were in Ontario, all conservative for 40 years, going back into the 70s, they always thought that it was their responsibility to ensure that society took care of and took account of and fostered the improvement of lives for people living in poverty. And I think that's really the clarion call to all of us, is to heed that call, and to realize that societies that are the best societies are the ones that really believe in equality, and really believe in true equality of opportunity, and justice for all.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. I couldn't agree more, sir. We can't live in a society where people are left behind. And once again, I just appreciate your candor, your transparency, your deep introspection and authenticity, and most importantly, your leadership and solidarity. Whenever we reach out, you're there for community. And I just really appreciate all that you stand for and all the work that you consistently do on behalf of so many. And as always at SETC, we close the way we began by giving thanks to the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We give thanks to all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We give thanks to all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much, John. I so appreciate you.
Thanks a lot, and I'm fast becoming one of those elders.